Mind Architect Lab Deep Dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling, well, let's be honest, probably one of the most complex, emotionally loaded relationships out there.
Absolutely. The mother and her adult child.
Yeah.
It's foundational, isn't it?
It really is. And it's defined by such extremes. You know, you've got years, decades sometimes of intense love, care, sacrifice.
And then adulthood hits. And sometimes that dynamic shifts into something really painful. Distance, maybe, or criticism that feels, well, way out of proportion.
Well, just this confusing indifference. It can be baffling.
Yeah, baffling and deeply hurtful.
And that's the core question we're looking at today. The one that so many parents, especially mothers, ask themselves, why? After everything, why does my adult child seem to undervalue me? Did I mess up somewhere?
It's a heartbreaking question, and it hits hard because it feels like a rupture in what's supposed to be the most secure bond, right?
Exactly. Now, our mission today, let's be clear, isn't about giving easy fixes or, and this is important, assigning blame.
No, definitely not. We're bringing in some heavy hitters from psychology, Bowlby, Mahler, Bowen, Klein, to help us decode the behavior. We want to look past the surface, what is happening.
And get to the invisible, often unconscious why. Why are these interactions playing out this way?
We're essentially mapping the psychological forces underneath it all. Because the big idea here, the premise we're working from, is that this adult relationship, it often becomes a stage.
A stage for what?
For reenacting unresolved dramas, unconscious scripts that were written way back in childhood.
Right. So understanding those old scripts is the key. Not necessarily to change the other person, but maybe to change your own internal response.
Precisely. That's where the real power lies, shifting your perspective, even if the external situation doesn't change overnight.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. If we want to understand why an adult child might pull away or seem critical, we really have to go back to the beginning.
To the foundations. The patterns you see now, they didn't just appear out of nowhere. They're often echoes of really early developmental stuff.
And we're focusing on three big psychological theories here, right? But they're not just separate ideas.
No, that's key. They kind of link together. They form almost a causal chain that helps explain this recurring, often painful tension we see.
So where do we start?
We have to start with the absolute bedrock of human connection, security. And for that, we turn to John Bowlby and attachment theory. Bowlby's core insight, and it was revolutionary at the time, was that an infant's need for a secure emotional bond with their main caregiver, usually the mother, historically isn't just nice to have. It's a fundamental biological imperative.
Like needing food or shelter.
Exactly. It's wire in for survival, not just physical survival, but psychological survival too. This bond is what gives the child that secure base, that feeling of safety they need to explore the world.
And the quality of that early bond, you know, how sensitive the mother is, how responsive, how consistently there she is, that shapes everything going forward.
It absolutely does. That early interaction becomes the blueprint, the sort of internal code for how the child learns to see themselves and others in relationships. This is where Bowlby's concept of internal working models, IWMs, comes in.
IWMs. Sounds technical, but what does it mean in practice?
Think of them like the background operating system for your relationships. Unconscious rules or scripts that guide your expectations, they generally cover three areas.
Okay.
1, beliefs about the self, like am I lovable, am I worthy of care? 2, beliefs about others. Are people generally reliable? Can I trust them to be there when I need them?
And the third.
Beliefs about relationships themselves. What do I have to do to stay connected? Is it safe to be close? Do I need to fight for attention or maybe hide my feelings?
So if you had that consistently warm, responsive care early on, you develop secure attachment, your IWMs are generally positive, you feel worthy, you trust others. Makes sense.
Right. But what if that early environment wasn't so consistently nurturing? That's where we see insecure attachment patterns develop. And these are crucial for understanding the friction in the adult mother-child dynamic.
Okay, so let's get into those insecure patterns.
We'll focus on the two main ones that really fuel the kind of devaluing behavior we're talking about. First up is anxious attachment.
Anxious. What leads to that?
This often comes from inconsistent caregiving. Maybe the mother was sometimes really attuned and loving, but other times she was preoccupied, maybe stressed, overwhelmed, or just unavailable emotionally.
So the child never quite knows what to expect.
Exactly. Connection feels unpredictable. This breeds a deep, chronic fear of abandonment. a kind of hypervigilance about the relationship. They never feel fully secure in the bond.
And how does that translate into adulthood, specifically with the mother?
Well, this adult child often leans towards what looks like dependence or sometimes emotional clinging. Their internal script, that IWM, tells them they have to work really hard, maybe even desperately, to keep that connection alive.
So if the mother does something perfectly normal, like needs some space, takes vacation, doesn't call back immediately,
The anxiously attached adult child can perceive that distance as catastrophic. It's not seen as healthy autonomy. It triggers that core fear of abandonment, total rejection.
wow. So the reaction could be huge. Panic.
Anger.
Huge reactions, yeah. Panic, anger, maybe floods of texts and calls trying to pull the mother back in. They're intentionally testing the bond constantly, trying to get proof that it's still solid, because deep down they don't trust that it is.
Okay, that's anxious. Now, the second pattern sounds like it might map more directly onto that feeling of being devalued. That's avoidant attachment.
Yes, avoidant attachment. And this pattern often develops in response to care that was, say, consistently neglectful, emotionally distant, or maybe even intrusive, where the child's need for space or their own feelings wasn't really respected.
So either not enough connection or too much of the wrong kind. Right. The child learns a really tough lesson very early on. Expressing my needs for closeness either leads to disappointment because no one responds, or it leads to feeling overwhelmed or engulfed.
So the safest strategy is
Suppress those needs. Push them down. Don't rely on others. Learn to be fiercely independent almost. Anti-dependent. It's a self-preservation tactic.
This is interesting because a mother listening might think, well, my child is very successful, very independent. That sounds like secure attachment, right?
That's a common misconception, that high-functioning independence can actually mask a deep underlying avoidance of genuine emotional intimacy.
So how does that play out with the mother in adulthood?
That learned suppression means closeness feels threatening. Their whole system is kind of wired to see intimacy, especially from the primary attachment figure, as potentially dangerous or suffocating.
So the mother's attempts to connect, even loving ones.
Exactly. The frequent calls, the offers of help, the expressions of concern, things the mother intends as love, can be perceived by the avoidant adult child as intrusive, smothering, overwhelming.
So say the mother calls, worried about her son's stressful job, and offers to, bring over dinner. He might snap back, "Mom, I'm fine. Stop worrying."
Yes. And the mother hears, "Your concern is annoying. I don't need you." Devaluation.
But what's happening internally for the son in that moment, according to this theory?
He's likely reacting to the perceived neediness or anxiety behind the offer. His internal working model flags it as a potential engulfment threat. She's trying to get too close, or she thinks I can't handle things. And his automatic learned response is to create distance, push her away.
So the coldness, the dismissal, it's a defense mechanism.
It's an unconscious, learned strategy kicking in. It's not necessarily about the dinner or even the mother as a person today. It's filtering the current interaction through that old lens where emotional closeness felt unsafe. He's trying to protect his sense of self, repeating a pattern that worked for survival back then.
Okay, so Bellamy explains the drives for connection. But then there's this equally powerful, necessary drive away from connection, right? Towards independence.
Absolutely. And that's where Margaret Mahler's work on separation individuation comes in. She described early childhood development as this incredible journey, a kind of psychological second birth.
Going from being completely merged with the mother.
That symbiotic fusion, yeah, to becoming a separate, functioning, autonomous self. It's maybe the biggest psychological hurdle we face. How do you break away from your lifeline without feeling like you're going to fall?
And Mahler mapped out stages for this. Is there one stage that's particularly relevant to this adult conflict we're discussing?
Definitely. It's the rapprochement crisis. Usually happens somewhere between, say, 15 and 24 months.
Rapprochement. What's going on there?
Picture the toddler. They've mastered walking, right? They can physically move away from mom, explore the room, huge power. They toddle off feeling amazing.
Then they look back.
Exactly. They suddenly have this dawning awareness. Whoa! I am separate from her. And that realization brings this wave of anxiety. Separation feels scary.
So it's this conflict. I want to be my own person, but also don't leave me.
Precisely. Mahler called it a period of intense ambivalence, the classic push-pull. They'll run away, the push for autonomy, then quickly run back for a hug or just eye contact, the pull for reassurance. That's the effective refueling she talked about.
Okay, so it's a tricky phase for the child.
Mm-hmm.
How does the mother's reaction impact things? What if she doesn't handle that push-pull well?
That's critical. If the mother reacts to the child's budding independence with her own anxiety, maybe she gets clingy or possessive, or maybe she withdraws emotionally, making the child feel guilty or bad for wanting to explore.
And then the whole process gets stuck.
It gets compromised, yeah. The child doesn't learn how to separate in a healthy way. They don't fully internalize that sense of being a separate self while still feeling connected and loved. They can remain kind of psychologically entangled or fused.
And this is the drama that can get replayed decades later. The adult child who seems to devalue the mother.
That behavior, the distancing, the criticism can sometimes be understood as a really delayed, often quite clumsy attempt to finally finish that separation process.
Wow. So they never fully individuated back then, and now they're trying again.
In a way, yes. The adult child still feels, on some unconscious level, threatened by too much closeness with the mother. So when the mother reaches out, even with genuine love and concern,
It triggers that old rapprochement anxiety, that fear of being swallowed up, losing themselves in the fusion.
it can, yes. That old fear gets reactivated. So the sharp words, the sudden need for space, the nitpicking, it's less about the specific thing the mother said or did today.
And more about pushing back against that feeling of engulfment.
It's an urgent, almost desperate defense. They're throwing up a wall because their sense of self, which maybe never fully solidified as separate, feels endangered by the perceived pull of the mother's presence or needs. They're rejecting the feeling of fusion, not necessarily the mother herself.
That's a huge reframing for a mother who feels personally attacked. It's not malice, it's psychological self-preservation.
From this perspective, yes. They're trying, however awkwardly, to protect a sense of me that still feels fragile and overly connected to you.
Okay, that connects perfectly to our third theory, which looks at the whole family system. Murray Bowen's concept of differentiation of self.
Yes, Bowen takes this idea of separation and connection and frames it within the family system. Differentiation is basically a measure of emotional maturity.
What does it mean to be highly differentiated?
It means you can maintain your own sense of self, your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, identity, even when you're in close emotional contact with important people, especially family. It's about balancing two fundamental life forces, the drive for individuality and the drive for togetherness.
So a highly differentiated person can disagree with their mother without it turning into a huge drama.
Exactly. They can separate their thinking from their feelings. They can say, Mom, I love you. I hear your concern, but I'm going to make my own decision here. And they can do it calmly, without excessive guilt or anger. They can respond thoughtfully instead of reacting emotionally.
They know where they end and the other person begins.
Perfectly put. They have good internal boundaries. They're less likely to get swept up in the emotional tides of the family.
Okay, so that's the ideal. What about low differentiation? Because that sounds like where the problems we're discussing arise.
Low differentiation is the opposite. These individuals are much more prone to what Bowen called emotional reactivity and fusion. Their sense of self is kind of blurry, easily merged with the feelings and anxieties of those around them, especially family.
So when things get tense in the family,
They can't hold on to their own center. They get overwhelmed by the family's emotional energy. They find it incredibly difficult to set calm, clear boundaries because disagreeing feels like a threat to the relationship itself.
and how do they cope with that unbearable tension, that feeling of fusion?
Bowen identified two main, often unhealthy strategies people with low differentiation use to manage anxiety-infused relationships.
What are they?
One is submissiveness. Basically giving up your own self to keep the peace, becoming the family chameleon, always agreeing, never rocking the boat.
Okay, that's one way. What's the other?
The other, and this is highly relevant to our topic, is emotional cutoff.
Cutoff. That sounds exactly like the distancing and perceived devaluation we're talking about.
It is. Emotional cutoff is basically creating extreme distance, physical, emotional, or both, to manage the anxiety of fusion. It can look like silence, avoiding contact, moving far away, or using intense criticism and anger to create a protective wall.
So it's a boundary, but a really harsh reactive one?
It's boundary setting gone wrong, essentially, because the lowly differentiated person lacks the internal maturity to say calmly and confidently, I need some space, while still maintaining connection.
They resort to this extreme measure. They use the anger, the silence, the criticism to forcefully blast out some psychological breathing room.
They're trying to break free from that feeling of being emotionally fused or controlled.
Okay, I have to push on this a bit. It's just about needing space. Why does it often feel so mean? Why the sharp criticism, the blaming? Doesn't that suggest real anger at the mother, not just at the dynamic?
That's a fair question, and it gets to the heart of why it feels like personal devaluation to the mother. The reason it comes out as anger and criticism, the reactivity, is because the person is lowly differentiated.
Ah, okay. So the anger is a symptom of the low differentiation itself.
Exactly. If they could maintain what Bowen called a non-anxious presence, they would just communicate their needs assertively. But because their emotional system is fused with the mother's, her perceived anxiety or neediness or even just her presence triggers their anxiety, and they react explosively to try and manage that internal state.
So they're rejecting the whole dynamic, the whole feeling of being caught in that emotional field, and it manifests in anger directed at the perceived source, the mother.
Precisely. It comes out as anger or devaluation because they lack the internal emotional regulation skills to set limits calmly and maintain connection simultaneously.
Wow. Okay, so connecting these three theories. Insecure attachment from early on makes that toddler separation phase, the rapprochement, much harder.
Right. Complicates it.
Which then hinders the development of strong differentiation of self later on.
Making the person more prone to fusion and reactivity.
And that resulting emotional reactivity or cutoff in adulthood is the very behavior that the mother experiences as painful devaluation. Like decades of unresolved developmental pressure finally erupting.
That's a great way to put it. It's the culmination of those early scripts playing out on the adult stage.
Okay, that framework of the developmental chain, attachment, separation, differentiation is incredibly helpful for understanding the structure of the conflict. But what about the sheer emotional intensity? Why the wild swings we sometimes see? The adult child who 1 minute seems dependent, needing help, and the next is just scathing, intensely critical.
Yeah, that oscillation is really significant. And to understand that, we need to get into the psychology of idealization and, crucially, disillusionment. It gets really interesting here. #1Navy, confronting the mother real. So think back to infancy. For a baby, the mother isn't just another person. She's perceived initially as, well, almost godlike, an idealized mother.
All-powerful, perfectly attuned.
Exactly. An omnipotent, flawless extension of the baby's own self, able to meet every need instantly. Now, this isn't just vanity. This idealized image is actually a necessary psychological construction for the infant's basic sense of safety and survival in a potentially overwhelming world.
And our culture kind of reinforces that, doesn't it? The myth of the perfect, endlessly patient, self-sacrificing mother.
Absolutely. It's baked into so many narratives. The problem is life happens, maturation happens, and eventually, inevitably, the child has to confront the mother real.
The human being.
The actual human being, someone with her own limits, her own needs, her flaws, her history, her failures. Someone who exists separate from the child's needs.
And that must be a shock. Especially if the mother perhaps tried very hard to live up to that idealized image for years.
It's often experienced as more than just a simple realization. It can be a profound psychological blow, what some analysts call a narcissistic wound.
A wound to the child's ego.
Yes, because the child's own sense of stability and worth was partly built on the foundation of that perfect, idealized mother. When the cracks in the pedestal appear, maybe she gets tired, sets a boundary, admits a mistake, needs help herself, it can feel like a deep betrayal of that foundational childhood ideal.
So wait, you're saying the devaluation we see in adulthood might not even be about the mother's current behavior?
Often it's not primarily about the present. It can be a prolonged, angry, grieving reaction to that past fall from the pedestal. The adult child, still unconsciously clinging to the fantasy of the perfect, all-giving mother,
is punishing the real human mother for failing to be that impossible ideal.
Precisely. They're punishing her for her very humanity, her limits, her mistakes, her needs. These are viewed not with empathy, but as evidence of her betrayal of the role she was assigned in their childhood psychic drama.
So the sarcasm, the nitpicking about small things, the constant criticism,
can all be understood as ways the adult child is venting this furious grief and disappointment over the loss of the perfect fantasy mother. They're holding the real mother accountable for shattering an illusion they perhaps never fully relinquished. #2. Love, hate, and the defense against guilt. Object relations.
This idea of punishing the real mother for not being the ideal one, it leads us into some really deep territory around ambivalence. How we hold on to feelings of intense love and sometimes intense hate for the same person. This is where object relations theory, especially Melanie Klein, comes in.
Yes, Klein's work is incredibly powerful, though sometimes difficult, for understanding the roots of this love-hate dynamic. She looked at the infant's earliest ways of managing overwhelming feelings.
And the infant ego isn't equipped to handle complexity, right?
Right.
It can't grasp that the same person who gives comfort can also be the source of frustration.
Exactly, it's too much. So to cope with the anxiety this creates, the infant uses a very primitive but necessary defense mechanism called splitting, or clivagem in Kleinian terms.
Splitting, like creating separate mental boxes.
Pretty much. In what Klein called the schizoid-paranoid position, the earliest phase, the mother isn't seen as one whole person. She's mentally split into two-part objects. The good object, the satisfying breast, the comforting presence, and the bad object, the frustrating, absent, or delaying breast mother.
And the feelings get split too.
Totally. Yeah. All the love, gratitude, positive feelings go towards the good object. All the rage, frustration, destructive impulses go towards the bad object. This keeps the good safe from the bad, protecting the vital loving connection from being contaminated by the hate. It's a survival mechanism for the fragile ego.
That's infancy. You can't stay there.
Yeah.
Healthy development means moving beyond that splitting.
Absolutely. The crucial developmental task is to make the leap into what Klein termed the depressive position. This isn't about clinical depression. It's a developmental achievement.
What happens in the depressive position?
The ego matures enough to start integrating these split-off parts. The child begins to realize that the good mother and the bad mother are actually the same person, one whole, complex individual who is sometimes satisfying and sometimes frustrating.
Okay. Why is that realization painful? Why depressive?
Because with that integration comes an overwhelming feeling. Depressive anxiety, which is essentially profound guilt and concern.
Guilt. Over what?
The child realizes, oh my God, the person I love most in the world, the person I depend on, I also had hateful, destructive feelings and fantasies towards her bad aspects. It's the crushing weight of recognizing your own aggression towards someone you deeply love and need.
Wow. That sounds incredibly painful. But you're saying this pain, this guilt is actually good, a sign of growth.
It's essential because that very guilt, that painful concern for the whole mother, good and bad parts combined, is what motivates the desire for reparation.
Reparation, making amends.
Yes. The urge to repair any damage done in reality or fantasy, to protect the mother, to show love and care for her as a whole, flawed person. This is where D.W. Winnicott's idea of concern comes in. It's the very foundation of mature empathy and the capacity for real, complex, adult love that can tolerate imperfection.
Okay. So if we loop this back to the adult child who is actively devaluing their mother, you're suggesting they haven't successfully navigated this depressive position. They're stuck.
Or perhaps more accurately, when faced with conflict, disappointment, or the mother's realness in adulthood, they regress back to the more primitive defense of splitting.
The old pattern kicks back in.
Yes. The clivagem gets reactivated under stress. Suddenly, in that moment of conflict, the bad mother, the frustrating, imperfect, limiting one, completely takes over their perception. She becomes all bad.
And the good mother, the decades of love and care.
Psychologically obliterated, temporarily wiped out or dismissed. The adult child is flooded with that primitive rage that was never fully integrated with love and concern.
Let's really zero in on that hostility, though, because that's what cuts the deepest for the mother. Why the need to make her seem totally bad? Why not just disagree or feel disappointed? Why the intense negativity?
Because, paradoxically, the devaluation itself is serving as an active, powerful defense against feeling the guilt and pain of the depressive position.
Say more about that. How does making her bad protect against guilt?
Think about it. If the adult child allows themselves to feel ambivalence, okay, I'm angry at her for this, but I also love her and she did her best and maybe I'm being unfair, that complexity brings with it the unbearable weight of depressive guilt. The guilt of hating someone you love.
Which is too painful to tolerate.
For someone who hasn't fully integrated it, yes. So by unconsciously, or sometimes consciously, painting the mother as all bad, she's manipulative, she's selfish, she never cared, the adult child essentially gives themselves permission for their anger and distance.
It justifies the rejection.
Exactly. If the mother is constructed as this totally bad object, then the anger, criticism, and withdrawal feel righteous, earned, necessary. It allows the child to avoid the excruciating internal conflict and guilt that comes with recognizing the complex reality, that they might harbor destructive feelings towards the person they also love and need the most.
That is profound. So the sheer intensity of the negative attacks, the devaluation, It could actually be proportional to the depth of the underlying love and the intensity of the guilt they're desperately trying to ward off.
That's often the tragic paradox. The ferocity of the attack can sometimes signal the power of the underlying bond that makes the ambivalence and the associated guilt so incredibly threatening to the child's ego. They're trying to demolish the good image to make the disappointment and their own bad feelings manageable. So if we take all this theory, the attachment patterns, the separation struggles, the splitting, and apply it to those difficult real-time interactions, what we often see are not conscious, calculated acts of cruelty.
Right? They're more like automatic responses.
Unconscious defense mechanisms, exactly. Psychological strategies the ego deploys automatically to shield itself from anxiety, shame, guilt, or feelings it just can't handle.
Understanding these defenses, then, is like getting a decoding manual when the adult-child behavior seems completely irrational or unfair.
Recognizing the defense mechanism at play can shift your perspective. You move from feeling personally attacked, why are they doing this to me, to understanding the internal conflict the child is wrestling with. What anxiety is this behavior trying to manage for them?
Okay, let's break down some key defenses that show up in this dynamic. Projection. This one feels really common and particularly painful. It's basically taking your own unacceptable feelings or traits.
Things like inadequacy, anger you feel guilty about, self-doubt, maybe even forbidden desires.
And instead of owning them, you unconsciously attribute them to someone else. You sling them onto an external screen.
Right. The ego pushes the internal conflict outside because it's easier to fight an external enemy than an internal one. Let's take a classic example in this context. Say an adult son is really struggling with feelings of insecurity at work. He feels like a fraud. He's terrified of failure. He has this relentless inner critic telling him he's not smart enough or capable enough.
Painful feelings to sit with.
Very. Too painful, perhaps. So instead of facing that internal self-doubt, he might interact with his mother and suddenly lash out.
Accusing her.
Accusing her of being, say, too critical or always undermining him or dredging up something from the past. You never really believed I could do this.
Even if objectively that's not true or not relevant now.
Exactly. Because he's not actually reacting to her current behavior or even her past behavior in that moment. He's battling his own projected feelings of inadequacy. He's put his self-criticism onto her, and now she feels like the source of the judgment that's actually coming from inside him.
So he fights her because it's easier than fighting his own internal critic.
Much easier. He gets to feel righteous anger at her judgment instead of the shame of his own self-doubt.
Which explains why, if the mother tries to defend herself with facts, "But I did encourage you, I came to your graduation," it just doesn't land.
It bounces right off because the argument isn't about the facts. It's about the feeling of being judged or criticized, a feeling he unconsciously placed onto her moments before.
Is there a telltale sign of projection?
Often, it's the sheer intensity and certainty of the accusation, sometimes without much concrete evidence in the present, and the feeling that you, as the recipient, are being blamed for something that doesn't quite fit or feels exaggerated. It's like you've walked into the middle of their internal movie. Okay, next defense. Reaction formation. This one is trickier because on the surface, it can look positive.
How's it work?
Reaction formation happens when someone has deep-seated feelings or impulses, maybe strong resentment, hostility, maybe intense dependency needs that their conscious mind finds totally unacceptable or threatening. Morally wrong, perhaps?
So they can't admit those feelings, even to themselves.
Right, so the ego defends against them by doing a complete 180. It represses the bad feeling and makes the person consciously feel and behave in the exact opposite way. But, and this is key, often in a really exaggerated, rigid, or compulsive manner.
So the clue for the mother here might be behavior that just feels too much.
Yeah.
Over the top.
Exactly. The kindness feels forced. The devotion seems excessive. The solicitousness is almost suffocating. It doesn't feel quite natural or relaxed.
Can you give an example in the mother-son dynamic?
Sure. Let's imagine a son who, maybe due to unresolved issues from earlier stages that fusion anxiety Muller talked about, perhaps harbors deep unconscious resentment towards his mother, or maybe an overwhelming, scary desire to be completely independent from her.
Feelings he finds unacceptable. I shouldn't hate my mother, or I shouldn't want to abandon her.
Right. So instead of acknowledging that anger or that need for distance, which feels too dangerous,
He becomes the perfect son.
he adopts this posture of excessive, almost performative care, and devotion. He's the one calling constantly, just checking in. He insists on managing her finances, even if she's capable. He researches her health obsessively, maybe gets overly involved in her social life. He might cancel his own important plans frequently, always framing it as selfless concern for her.
Okay, on paper, that sounds like a wonderfully caring son. How is that a defense mechanism or a form of devaluation?
It's a defense because its rigidity serves to keep the unacceptable feelings, the resentment, the wish for distance, safely locked away, repressed. The constant performance of goodness prevents the badness from surfacing. And it's a subtle form of control and therefore devaluation because by managing her life so closely, he prevents her from having needs or making choices that might trigger his underlying anxiety or resentment. He keeps the relationship on his terms under the guise of caring for her. It prevents a truly authentic adult-to-adult relationship where both people's real complex feelings and needs can exist.
So the intense valorization is actually a way to avoid seeing her as a separate, capable person with her own life. It keeps her in the cared-for box.
Precisely. It denies the complexity, the ambivalence that's part of any real relationship. He's interacting with a role he needs her to play, not necessarily with her authentic self. And that lack of seeing the real person is a form of devaluation.
Okay, the last defense mechanism we'll cover, and maybe the one that explains those sudden, seemingly out-of-the-blue explosions. Displacement.
Yes, displacement. This is when emotional energy, usually anger or frustration, gets redirected from its original source, where it feels too dangerous to express it.
Like your boss, or maybe your partner, or just the stress of modern life.
Onto a safer substitute target, someone you unconsciously feel won't retaliate in a way that has devastating consequences.
So the classic example.
Yeah.
Have a terrible day at work, can't yell at the boss.
So you come home and yell at your partner or the kids, or you call your mother.
Right. And suddenly, a minor issue she forgot to relay a message, or her opinion on a news event differs from yours, becomes the trigger for a major blow-up. Yep. She becomes the unjust target.
It happens constantly in families. The adult child is carrying a huge load of stress, job pressure, relationship problems, financial worries, you name it. They can't vent it where it originates.
Because the stakes are too high.
Yeah.
Lose your job, damage your marriage.
Exactly. So they need an emotional outlet, a container. And who often becomes that container?
From mother. But why her? Why is she perceived as the safest target for all this displaced frustration? This seems like the ultimate paradox.
It is a huge paradox. But think back to Bowlby and the primary attachment figure. The mother is often the primordial object, the first, most fundamental source of safety and security. Deep down, on an unconscious level, the adult child often carries a profound, implicit trust in the strength and permanence of that original bond.
A trust that she can take it. That she won't abandon them no matter how badly they behave.
Essentially, yes. She was the original container for their overwhelming infant anxieties and rage. Unconsciously, there's often a belief that she can still absorb their adult overflow without breaking the connection. It's almost like they believe she's the only person strong enough or obligated enough to withstand their negativity.
That is incredibly sad, but also explains so much. The attack isn't necessarily a sign that they don't value the bond.
Ironically, the attack might happen precisely because they unconsciously believe the bond is indestructible. The cruelty, the harsh criticism, the sudden distance, it can be a deeply distorted, unconscious test of that bond, or a desperate, misplaced plea for containment. They attack the safe harbor because, on some level, they trust it won't sink.
So for the mother experiencing this, reframing it is crucial. The devaluation isn't proof the love is gone. In a twisted way, it might be proof that the child unconsciously relies on the bedrock certainty of her love, even as they attack it.
It's a difficult perspective to hold on to when you're feeling hurt, but it can fundamentally shift the emotional charge of these interactions. It moves from, he hates me, to, he's overwhelmed and unconsciously trusts me to absorb this.
Okay, we've journeyed through some really deep psychological territory to understand the why behind this painful dynamic. Now, the crucial turn. What does this all mean for you, the mother who might be experiencing this?
Yes, the focus shifts now because the sources are very clear. You likely can't fix your adult child's internal working models or resolve their decades-old separation issues. That's their work to do, if they choose.
But you do have power somewhere.
Absolutely. You have immense power over your own internal world, your own responses, and your own boundaries. The path to greater peace isn't about changing them. It's about internal transformation for you.
And where does that internal work start?
It often needs to start with looking honestly at the mother's own identity, especially post-active parenting. Because sometimes boundary issues stem from an unresolved identity shift. Hashtag tag tag one, the mother's identity and the empty nest. For many, many women, the role of mother active, hands-on mothering isn't just a role. It becomes a core part of their identity, their sense of purpose, their self-worth. It's all-consuming and often deeply rewarding.
And then the kids grow up, they leave home, physically or psychologically.
And that transition triggers what we commonly call the empty nest syndrome.
Yes.
Which, as you said earlier, isn't trivial. It's often a period of genuine grief.
Grief for the loss of that specific role.
Yes, loss of the daily structure, loss of feeling constantly needed in that particular way, loss of a central organizing principle for life. It can feel like a loss of purpose, prompting a real identity crisis. If I'm not primarily mom anymore, who am I?
And if that grief, that sense of loss, isn't really acknowledged and processed,
it can create this huge emotional vacuum inside. And nature abhors a vacuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
The temptation is to try and pull the adult children back in to fill that space.
leading to unrealistic expectations.
Exactly. The mother might perhaps unconsciously start expecting her adult child to fill that emotional void, to provide the same level of involvement, inclusion in decisions, or sense of purpose that raising them once did.
Which, from the adult child's perspective, especially if they're struggling with their own separation issues,
Feels incredibly suffocating. It reinforces their fears of fusion and triggers those distancing behaviors we talked about.
So if you're a mother feeling devalued, the first, maybe hardest step is some rigorous, critical self-reflection, looking inward.
Yes. Asking some tough, honest questions. We suggest focusing on 3 areas.
Okay, what's the first?
First, how much of my core identity, my sense of self-worth, was really tied up in being an active, hands-on mother? It's about separating me, the person, from me, the mother role. Are you maybe clinging to the role because it feels safer or more known than exploring other parts of your identity?
That takes courage to examine. What's the second question?
Second, am I perhaps subconsciously looking to my adult child to manage my feelings, my loneliness, my fear of irrelevance, my boredom? Check the motivation behind your interactions. Are you calling because you genuinely want to connect or because you feel lonely and need them to fix it? That's putting your emotional management onto them, which often backfires.
And the third question, this one sounds particularly tough.
It is. Third, is my expressed concern really about my child's well-being, or is there a part of it, even small, that's driven by my need to feel needed? Be honest. Do you secretly feel a bit more valuable when they're struggling and need your advice? Do you feel a twinge of resentment when they're succeeding independently without you?
Oof, that's peeling back layers.
It is. But if you find yourself answering yes even slightly, it suggests you might be unintentionally sending signals that punish their autonomy, which fuels the dynamic.
So the underlying task here is really about grieving the end of the active parenting chapter.
To fully step into the role of being an adult relative to another adult. Processing that personal grief is what frees the adult child from feeling responsible for filling your emotional space or validating your existence.
And that allows for a different kind of relationship to potentially emerge.
A relationship based on chosen connection and mutual respect, rather than obligation or unresolved need. It's arguably one of the greatest gifts a mother can give her adult child. The freedom to live their own life without feeling responsible for her happiness. Hashtag tag 2, cultivating boundaries and assertive communication.
Okay, so that internal work on identity and expectations is foundational. But then how do you translate that into changing the actual interactions, moving away from those reactive cycles?
This is where boundaries come in, and learning to communicate them assertively, not aggressively or passively.
Let's define boundaries in this context. It's not about building walls, is it?
No, not necessarily. Think of boundaries as clear demarcation lines. They protect your emotional and psychological well-being. They define what's okay and what's not okay and how you interact. In families, crossing boundaries like giving constant, unsolicited advice, criticizing life choices, disrespecting decisions, demanding constant access, inevitably breeds resentment and leads to distance. It causes the pushback that feels like devaluation.
And we talked about how low differentiation leads to either collapsing, submissiveness, or exploding cutoff.
Yeah.
So if the mother wants to break that pattern,
She needs to model something different. She needs to model healthy differentiation through assertive communication.
which is the middle ground between being a doormat and being hostile.
Exactly. It's not about silence and resentment, passive aggression, nor is it about blaming attacks, aggression. It's about clearly, calmly, and respectfully stating your own needs and limits, without attacking the other person.
And the source material specifically recommends a model for this.
Yes, the Nonviolent Communication C&V model, developed by Marshall Rosenberg, is highlighted as a really effective tool here because it focuses on observations, feelings, needs, and requests, taking the blame and judgment out of it.
Okay, CNV. Sounds good in theory, but applying it when you're feeling hurt or angry? That's tough.
Can we walk through the 4 steps using a common scenario? Like, say, the adult child constantly criticizing the mother's new partner or lifestyle choices.
Perfect example. Very common trigger.
Okay.
Yeah, step 1 is observation. Describe the specific behavior you observed, like a camera recording, without any evaluation or generalization.
So instead of, you're always putting down my partner, which is a judgment.
You'd say something factual like, when we spoke on Sunday, you brought up John's job history 3 times, and yesterday you mentioned you didn't like the color I painted the kitchen. Stick to the data, what actually happened.
Okay, observation, no judgment. Step 2, feeling. Express the emotion you felt as a result. Focus on your internal state. Right. Key here is using I feel, followed by an actual feeling word. I felt hurt, I felt discouraged, I felt anxious, I felt sad. Avoid I feel that you, or I feel judged, because those are thoughts or interpretations about the other person's intent.
So following the example, when those comments were made,
Yeah.
I felt hurt and also a bit defensive.
Good. Step 3, need. Identify the universal human need or value of yours that wasn't being met in that situation. This connects the feeling to something deeper.
Needs, respect, acceptance, harmony.
Exactly. Needs are universal. So you might say, because I have a deep need for respect for my choices and also need for acceptance for my family, or because I need support and harmony when we spend time together. This lifts it out of a you're wrong dynamic into my needs weren't met.
Makes sense. And finally, step 4, request. Make a clear, positive, concrete request for a future action. Not a demand, not a complaint about the past, not an ultimatum.
Right. A do request, not a don't request.
Yeah.
And possible. And make it specific and actionable. So, maybe. Would you be willing, going forward, to focus our conversations on things we both enjoy, like the grandkids or our shared hobbies, and refrain from commenting negatively on my partner or my home decorating choices?
It's an invitation to behave differently rather than an accusation.
Exactly. It invites collaboration. And notice, the whole statement connects the dots. When X happens, observation, I feel Y, feeling, because I need Z, need. Would you be willing to do A, request?
That structure really shifts the whole focus, doesn't it? The mother isn't defending herself or trying to prove she's right. She's simply stating her experience and her needs and asking for consideration.
Precisely. She's taking responsibility for her own feelings and boundaries, which is the essence of high differentiation. And by doing this calmly and consistently.
She's modeling the very skill her potentially low differentiated child struggles with.
Yes. She's demonstrating how to set a limit without attacking or withdrawing. If the child continues the behavior, she doesn't need to get drawn into an argument. She can calmly repeat the boundary. As I mentioned, hearing negative comments about my choices makes it hard for me to enjoy our conversation. I need respect. I'm going to end the call now. Let's try again tomorrow.
The power shifts. Not power over the child, but power over her own well-being and how she allows herself to be treated.
That's the core of it, safeguarding her own internal space and emotional health, regardless of whether the other person changes immediately. #outro.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like the journey through all this psychology, attachment, separation, defenses, leads to a place that isn't necessarily about achieving that perfect Hallmark card reconciliation.
No, often it's not. Sometimes that happens, which is wonderful. But the ultimate and perhaps more reliably achievable goal is finding internal peace for yourself, the mother. Peace that isn't entirely dependent on the adult child's behavior or the relationship's outcome.
And the key to that internal peace seems to be acceptance.
Acceptance, yes. And that's not passive resignation. It's an active process. It means courageously grieving the fantasy of the perfect relationship, the fantasy of the child you expected, the reciprocity you hoped for, grieving what isn't so you can start to engage with what is.
Embracing the reality of the relationship today with all its imperfections and complexities.
Exactly. Recognizing that mature love sometimes involves accepting the other person's path, even if that path includes distance or choices that cause you pain. Supporting their journey towards their own selfhood, however messy that looks.
And you mentioned earlier that understanding the why helps dissolve resentment. So the final key ingredient for acceptance is empathy. and informed empathy.
That's it. When you can genuinely shift your perspective, when you stop seeing the devaluation, the criticism, the distance purely as a personal attack on you or proof of your failures.
And instead start to see it, through the lens of these theories, as a symptom.
A symptom of their internal struggle, their unresolved attachment fears, their clumsy, desperate attempts to individuate, their difficulty managing ambivalence, their need to use defenses like projection or splitting because they lack other coping mechanisms. When you see it that way,
The sting lessens. The personalization fades.
a lot of the personal resentment can begin to dissolve because it's not about you anymore. It's about their own psychological story playing out.
So you stop reacting just to the surface behavior, the angry words.
And you start responding, internally at least, with a deeper wisdom. You understand the unconscious forces driving the interaction.
And even if the adult child doesn't change their behavior significantly,
You will have changed.
Yeah.
You'll have changed your internal framework, your emotional response. And that internal shift, that's the transformation you actually have control over. That's where your power lies.
changing the lens through which you view the pain, that in itself is a powerful move away from feeling like a victim of their actions.
It makes you the author of your own internal peace, regardless of the external weather.
Which brings us to our final thought for you. Something to carry with you. Building on this idea of where your true power and peace reside.
Think about this. Your peace isn't ultimately found in getting your adult child to change or to finally value you in the way you expect. Your peace is found in your own ongoing commitment to your own differentiation, separating your well-being from their approval, grieving the fantasies, and investing your precious energy not in fighting old battles, but in building your own whole self-defined life, independent of the role of mother.